This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. All around me a voice was sounding, this land was made for you and me.
If you watch the news these days, you're going to see a lot of things that have to do with the law, federal law, sometimes state law, people trying to make law like propositions, and people trying to sue other people. And basically, when you think about it, laws are the framework which governs how we live in a society together, at least. At least that. It controls the commerce between us and the interchange that we have as human beings in any society. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about someone from the Los Angeles area who represents a national organization. The name of the organization is the National Lawyers Guild. And they've been here for quite a while, and I'm very pleased. Let's get right to the show, and I want to introduce my guest, James Lafferty. Hi, James.
Good evening. Good evening.
Hi. I'm
Nice
really
to
glad
see
you came by.
Me too.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Lawyers Guild, the National
Sure.
Lawyers Guild.
Absolutely.
Why is it called National? Why lawyers? Why guild? I mean, is it just lawyers?
Well, no, it isn't, actually. The Lawyers Guild is one of the few it's a human rights bar association. It was started in 1937, really at the bequest, or I should say the behest, I should say, of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who at that time was trying to get his New Deal programs through Congress, and the American Bar Association, which was very conservative at the time, was fighting all of those programs. And he said, are there no lawyers out there who will defend my New Deal programs? And so the Lawyers Guild was formed, and it was called a guild because that was still near the end of the Depression, and lawyers were out of work too. So it was both an organization designed to protect human rights, advance human rights, the rights of workers and what have you, and also to provide a place for lawyers to network and find some work in its early days. Now it serves as a human rights bar association slowly and working on any number of issues that we'll probably talk about tonight, from civil rights, civil liberties, immigration issues, issues of war, issues of law and justice, Supreme Court nominees, and the rest.
Well, now, the American Bar Association, one of their major activities is rating or accrediting judges, because, I mean, there used to be. I think this administration said, I'm not going to put up with that anymore, I want my man in. And
this administration has turned to a very, very conservative group called the Federalist Society. It's a bar association of sorts of very conservative lawyers. And this administration is, I think, the first in memory, my memory certainly, to not go to the American Bar Association, which these days is quite mainstream, and get its recommendations. Rather, it goes to this very conservative Federalist Society to see what judges they would like to see on the court.
So now the history in America is, let's say, since Roosevelt, the presidents have been getting have been evaluating candidates for the Supreme Court on the basis of a rating from the American Bar Association.
Well, yes, but I don't think we should have any illusions. All presidents want to appoint someone to the court that they believe has the kind of judicial philosophy that will be simpatico with their legislative philosophy. As I say, Roosevelt was looking to have judges come onto the court who would be more sympathetic to his New Deal, these more progressive liberal programs. Bush clearly is looking for folks who would be more sympathetic to his far more conservative programs. That's not really a surprise. The notion that it's ever been a very scientific process or a nonpartisan process is a myth. It may be uglier these days than it has been in the past, but that's probably only because politics seems to be uglier these days perhaps than it has been in the past. But it's always been political, and the Supreme Court itself has always been very political. the notion that it makes its decisions in some kind of blind justice way, you know, those scales going back and forth. Every Supreme Court, from the first Supreme Courts from Marshall on down, you know, has always taken into account its own political philosophies, its own judicial philosophies, and the political climate in the country.
Right. So now, does the National Lawyers Guild do similar actions like the ABA or the Federalist Society?
No. What we do is when a nomination is made, as this time with Judge Alito, we do voice our opinion on that, and we lobby around our opinion on that. We've looked at his record, and we're already calling for a no vote on Judge Alito, as are many progressive or liberal organizations like our own. And so we will lobby around it, write letters, and urge our senators to vote and so forth. But we don't, as a Human Rights Bar Association, we're relatively small anyway compared to the American Bar Association, and I can assure you the President doesn't ask our opinion.
Okay. So you're basically centered around issues which have to do with human rights.
Yeah, in the broadest sense. In our early days, a lot of that took the form of defending the rights of workers, because remember, under the Roosevelt administration, the question was how to get the country back to work after the Depression, and labor unions and protecting the rights of labor unions and what have you. Over the years, we still do a lot of that, but then the civil rights movement came along, and we were the first bar association to be integrated. We were also the first bar association to send lawyers into the South to work with the Rosa Parks of the South and others in the South in the late 50s and 60s who were down there working in the civil rights movement and didn't have enough lawyers to support them. Later, the Vietnam War comes along, or and the Lawyers Guild set up draft counseling clinics or military counseling clinics, or provided defense for those who were arrested in anti-war demonstrations. And then immigrant rights has become a big issue, and so we work in that area. Kind of as we follow our clients, we follow these movements. As movements for social change ebb and flow and develop in this country, we offer our services to those who are trying to, from our point of view, improve the status of the average man and woman in the country.
Okay, well, how long have you been doing this?
Well, gosh, I started with the Guild, Lawyers Guild, actually, right out of law school in 1963, and was with it as its national director for a number of years. Then went off, set up my own law office, and did a whole flock of other things. And then about 15 years ago now, retired from the practice of law. I'm back with the Lawyers Guild, directing it here in Los Angeles.
My, oh my. So now, a lot of times, people watching national events on television, you can get the idea that to some degree, the judicial procedure has faltered or been a little bit corrupt. And let me just give you from my viewpoint. The 2000 election. Mm-hmm. That was not handled judiciously. Mm-hmm. That was straight favoritism of these 5 people said, forget this, forget that, he won, stop counting. Or in other issues like that, where what the court does or what the laws say is bypassed. The president, the current president, is ignoring a lot of the constitutional laws. I mean, it's known, and he's just declaring law. He says these are, what's the phrase, like non-combatants?
Non-combatants, yeah.
Makes up words,
yes, yes.
And he makes up regulations, and he says these things don't apply, and there's no consequence to it. So therefore, what I'm saying is that it can appear that we're going back to like frontier justice, where it's the guy with the fastest gun who rules, or the guy in our current case, the person with the most media influence, or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the reason I'm going through this is, what's your viewpoint over your long history as how the correct implementation of judicial procedures stabilizes a society?
Yeah. Well, I think you raise a good point. I think no society is static, after all. I think I said a few moments ago that I do think, well, I think that the case that you started your discussion with, Bush v. Gore, is an example beyond the normal realm of politics at the Supreme Court level. As I say, the Supreme Court has always been a political body. But Gore, Bush v. Gore, unless you're a very conservative jurist or lawyer in this country, if you're a middle-of-the-road lawyer or liberal lawyer, either one in this country, or professor of law, I think there's unanimity around the fact that that decision was a politically made decision in a rather naked manner, as you were alluding to. It's also true that this president and many other presidents often follow the law with a wink and a nod. One of the worst examples of that in recent times, and it hasn't just been this president, it was true during Vietnam as well, it was true during Korea. No real formal declaration of war was ever made, and yet it's clear in the Constitution that a formal declaration must be made by the Congress. But both because Congresses are often politically too chicken, if you will, or too timid to want to firmly declare war, they have it declare a state of emergency, or they grant the president certain emergency powers and so forth and so on. That's what we've done again with Iraq. There's been no formal declaration of war. The president has waged war more or less on his own, and all the Congress has done is vote a money to do it. They haven't said yea or nay to the war, except with the purse, which of course is critically important. Certainly we know there have been many administrations over the years that have been even more corrupt. There's a lot of corruption now being shown in this administration. There's been corruption in virtually every presidential administration. I'm not familiar enough with history to know if that was true of George Washington or not, but certainly in my lifetime, almost any president you could point to, there's been a certain level of corruption. Power corrupts, ultimate power corrupts ultimately, as they say, and fully. There does seem to be a sense, I will acknowledge, in this administration that almost the sky is the limit in that regard. And I think they've taken advantage of certain circumstances that they were looking for. You know, there's a very interesting document in this regard that relates to the law. It was called the Plan for the New American Century. And in it, Rumsfeld and Pearl and all these folks that drafted up in 1999 said what we really need in order to further our imperialist designs, what we really need is a catastrophe like Pearl Harbor, you know, something around which the nation could be united. And then 2 years later comes 9/11, of course. And Condoleezza Rice, what does she do immediately after 9/11? She calls together all of the Security Council people and the National Security Council, and she says, how do we take advantage of this opportunity? Now, for the families who lost loved ones in the World Trade Center, I dare say they would not have been happy to be at that room and learn that that was an opportunity that the administration was looking for, and it was. And they seized on it. Some people think they did more than that, but they at the very least seized on that opportunity of 9/11, if you will, from their point of view opportunity, to instill great fear among the American people, to convince us that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11, to convince us that we had to go to war to make ourselves safe, to pass a 395-page long USA Patriot Act that no more than 6 members of the Congress, by their own admission, had fully read before they voted on it.
There were 6?
6. Well,
I'm surprised to hear that.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm not so sure. And so all of that, you see, that kind of when a nation is attacked, and that's been true at other times. Pearl Harbor, obviously, allowed the United States to do something it had wanted to do, which was to get in the war, and rather than just support England in the war, to get in the war itself, because after all, the world was going to be carved up at the end of that war. Everybody knew that. The U.S. wanted a piece of the pie.
And there were even the vaunted FDR took some actions which could be considered a violation of civil liberties in terms of internment of the Japanese, and Truman and others. People have done that, you know, and it goes way back in American history with the Anti-Sedition Act
of
and so
1789 or whatever it was.
Right, but just for our audience, this secret document, what was this secret document? Plan for a New American Century?
Plan for a New American Century, yeah. And,
is this a secret document?
Well, it's not secret now. You can find it online. It was private for a time. Speaking of this document, Senator Kennedy has said that it's a call for a 21st century quest for empire on the part of the United States that no other nation in the world can, or rather should or will accept. Kennedy calls it that.
Threatening me.
Yeah. Although there's another set of documents that have now been declassified that your listeners could find online, and it was a task unless it's on behalf of the defense of our nation or on defense of some holy cause. The fact that it might be for profit, that it might be for oil, that it might be for world domination and corporate America, that's a hard pill to swallow, especially if your kid's over there.
Well, I mean, I know. I mean, I'm not a big student of history,
and the
but
National Security
there's a few people who tried to conquer the world, maybe Alexander, who said,
and the purpose of the meeting, and you read this in the papers now, this is not my interpretation, the purpose of the meeting was
their
how
justification is
do we control
to
the
protect
world?
the homeland.
Yeah,
They
they
like
speak very
Hitler.
openly in those
I know,
terms.
you know, I-
They knew that at the end of the Second World War, Britain was going to be weakened, the U.S. was going to be stronger, the Soviet Union was going to be a threat for world hegemony from their point of view, and so they wanted to know, and they talk in this document, how can we begin to carve up the British Empire and get it for ourselves, you see. And they talk openly about, well, first we've got to get the Middle East oil. And in a period of time between about 1945 and 1967, I think, I may be off a year or two, during that period of time, Great Britain had gotten about 60 or 70% of the Mideast oil. By the end of that period of time, it was the U.S. that was getting 60 or 70% of the oil from that part of the world, and Great Britain was getting much.
This is during what decade?
This would be from 1940s, 50s, and 60s.
So it has a lot to do with the
Yeah.
establishment of the State of Israel, the Suez
Yeah, sure,
War.
sure.
Because the British and Americans were,
Yeah.
that's where
Yeah,
the
yeah.
exchange of power has occurred.
Yeah, and you know, there are many people today, not on the left, but on the right, that speak approvingly of this notion that we should control the world.
But this was the U.S. State Department and the CIA?
No, not the CIA. There wasn't a real CIA. It was the U.S. State Department and the Department of Foreign Affairs. They had a Department
well,
of Foreign
okay, but I
Affairs.
mean, all right, just to be a devil's advocate,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be more responsible than just stepping back and saying, let's see what happens?
Well, in between.
I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
in between stepping back and seeing what happens and trying to rule the world.
Rule the world.
Is
Okay.
you know, other nations are going to be allowed themselves to be ruled. One has to learn, just as one has to learn to get along in one's family, without
you know,
when you're all adults.
But I thought
or
after
neighbors do. You can't expect to have other nations say, just come on and tell us how to do it, and take our oil, take our natural resources, install puppet governments. We don't care. You're the United States. Well, of course they care. Of course we would care. If the Muslim world were marching and occupying our country today, can you imagine what would be going on? And then Americans wonder why the Iraqis don't love us. Well, we're occupying their country. They may have hated Saddam Hussein, but now they hate us, you know, because it's their country. And no country wants another country occupying it and telling it and setting up its government and creating its constitution and deciding who its interim leaders are going to be. In fact, under the UN Charter, it's illegal to even do that while you're occupying another country. You're supposed to end your occupation and then let them decide what kind of government they want to have. We've done it just, of course, in reverse, because we want to make sure it's a government friendly to us at the end of the day. And that's not going to work anyway, because the people of Iraq are going to, they've been around a lot longer than we have, and they'll have their own way eventually.
But this is, let's say, like from 40, let's say essentially from 45 to 67 or something like
Yeah.
that. But I mean, and so somebody comes up with a plan of this is the way the world will be, and I'll take my share.
Well, here's how we can,
for sure,
here's
right?
how we can get more of it. Yeah.
Right. But I thought after World War II, the recognized plan for developing society amongst separate sovereign nations was the UN Charter. I mean, that's the answer?
Well,
Power sharing.
That was what some might call the utopian answer. I mean, that was the vision of many, because the world is bipolar in many ways. I mean, just as there are people who are greedy for power, there are other people who are greedy for justice, and who want to see, you know, a world at peace, as opposed to a world where the current Genghis Khan or the current Roman Empire is trying to grab more land. So there's tension between that, and you've got that tension today. I mean, we went to war in Iraq, ultimately, in violation of the UN Charter. Because after all, the UN doesn't have as big an army as we do. And it can't stop us, really, from doing what we want to do. We're the most powerful nation that ever was. So there's that tension. So there were people that, remember, that was supposed to, the First World War was supposed to be the war to end all wars. And then you have a Second World War, and then you want to set up a United Nation. That's a good idea. And it sometimes does wonderful things. But when it comes up against a superpower, in a world where there's really only one superpower now, not even two, as there was when there was a Soviet Union, the UN has a limited ability to do much about it. And then when you shrink it down further to the Security Council, in which there are only certain nations with a veto power, right? The power of the Western alliance, the US and Britain and France and Germany, what have you, becomes rather overwhelming in terms of third world countries, in terms of Muslim countries who aren't really represented in that body. They're represented in the General Assembly. So all of these tensions are now playing out between those who I would argue are more civilized and who represent our better instincts to want to learn to get along and not have some people starving to death while others are, you know, flying in fresh grapes every day from someplace, and those who don't give a damn about that and just want to get all they can, and under the theory that whoever has the most toys wins the game or something. So that's that tension still going on, and in this country as well as in the world.
Well, that's a very interesting concept, which I've actually never heard before, that there are individuals who thirst and advocate for justice. I mean, with energy and ambition and drive, comparable to people who just want bigger, more, better. Yeah.
Now, we can argue about, it certainly would seem to be the case that the venal among us, the greedy among us, those who think of the bottom line only as opposed to social or economic justice, their star seems to be in the ascendancy at the moment. On the other hand, you can argue that for all the poverty and hunger and disease in the world today, there's less of it today than there was at earlier times, as brutal as the world is today. Part of the distortion, if you will, of the world is that if you think about when you and I were 10 or 12 years old, the world wasn't as small in terms of television and in terms of 24-hour news channels. We might read in the newspaper about something that happened a week ago somewhere, and there might be somebody who could get a photograph out of Darfur or a photograph out of Pakistan from the earthquake. But now, if we're paying any attention at all, we're immersed in this awfulness that goes on every day in the world, which could lead one to think that the world is far worse off today than it ever was. What is true is that the world is more aware of this awfulness today. We as a people are more aware of it than we ever were. I'm not sure it's any worse off. It's bad enough, certainly.
Right, definitely. Technology has changed the nature of society.
Yeah. And following from that, therefore, the one way in which I do think we're worse off, and it could be the trump card, is around the environment, because while justice or injustice can be fought back and forth, the Lawyers Guild, our motto is justice is a constant struggle. You know, it's not, you don't just have one inning and the game is over. But you can finally pollute the planet. You can finally destroy the ozone to such an extent that it's unrepairable. And life can become unsustainable on Earth. And there are an awful lot of people who think we may be not more than 50 or 100 years away from that at our present pace of destruction of rainforests and all the rest. I'm not a scientist. I can't make a judgment about that, but I think we ought to be concerned about it, because people who have no axe to grind, who aren't trying to defend the corporation's right to cut more trees down in the Amazon, are the people who are telling us that the world is in danger if we continue to cut those trees or continue to emit those gases into the ozone layer, continue to burn fossil fuel and so forth. And the people that are telling us that, the scientists that are telling us that, they're working at lowly paid jobs. They're not on the payroll of General Motors or Exxon or somebody else. And so I'm inclined to believe them when they tell me that and that's something that we don't get a second chance at.
Right, we can get to a tipping point where there's irrevocable damage.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I concur with what you're saying. There's a lot of times when I hear about some awful decisions or programs or things that have been done this way and that, and I say, well, you know, when it comes down to it, it's a piece of paper. Like, let's say it's the ABM treaty. It can be re-signed, it can be restored.
Yes, that's right, that's right.
But you cannot, you're not going to accumulate ice out of refrigerators and bring it back to the
polar cap.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it could be an irrevocable damage.
Exactly right.
And that's the scariest part.
That's the scariest part. So in that regard, I'm not, in that area, I'm very pessimistic. In the area of man and woman's ability to finally find justice, to finally overcome the forces of greed or the forces that just don't give a damn, I remain hopeful and optimistic, but in the area of what we're doing to the planet in the meanwhile, it's hard to be optimistic. It's better to simply be worried and to see if we can avoid it.
Right, I agree. I mean, the battle for justice and equity is a journey.
Always going to be with us, yeah.
And it's always there, and there's always something else to correct us relative. So with the Lawyers Guild advocates for the rule of law.
We do advocate for the rule of law, but in fairness, we feel that the corporate America, for example, has enough lawyers advocating for it. The powerful interest in this country, we feel, are well equipped with lawyers, if you will. And the people that aren't well equipped with lawyers or can't afford lawyers are the people that we offer our services to.
So, in other words, to establish justice, essentially all you have to do is look for the undefended. Look for the interest that isn't represented, because that's going to be the side that's getting beat up. And that's not by definition, that's inequity.
That may seem simple. I frankly think that's as good a formula for finding what you need to do if a lawyer that wants to do good work on behalf of people's rights. That's as good a way of any to look at it. In other words, where is some interest being unrepresented? Because the moneyed class in this society is represented, as I say, whether it's corporate America or some rich, you know, I mean, I forget now, I just saw it in the paper again today, the percentage of major corporations in America that pay no income tax whatsoever. You know, and you and I are paying income taxes. The tax rate itself, which when I was a child went up very high on the super rich, the rate of tax they had to pay. Now it's not much different than what a poor person has to pay.
Right.
So the corporate forces, the moneyed forces in the country have the upper hand at the moment. Labor unions are weaker, corporations are stronger, the gap between rich and poor in America is greater than ever. We're now, in fact, economically speaking, the most non-egalitarian nation in the industrialized world.
Okay, Jim, guess what? We're out of time.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to have to get back together in another show.
Oh, we'll do it.
And we're going to talk about some other forces in society that may be shifting in addition to jurisprudence. Okay.
My pleasure.
Now it's the National Lawyers Guild, and we're going to. If it's on the internet, you can. It's the easiest thing is to Google
www.nlg-la.org.
Okay. Well, that's good. All right. And thanks for watching the show. I hope to see you next time. And remember, don't just stay home and watch TV. Go out and do something to help somebody.
This land is your land, and this land is my land. From the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. All around me a voice was sounding, this land was made for you and me. When the sun comes shining, then I was strolling in the wheat fields waving and the dust clouds rolling. The voice was chanting as the fog was lifting, this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made